First of all, thanks to all of you for coming today. I'd like to introduce our speaker, Sam, and both Chris and Hayley. Where are you? Right at the front, excellent, from our Marginal Fields team. So Sam, come over. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. So my name is Sam Gomersall. I'm the Commercial Director at PaleBlue.Energy. I'll tell you a little bit more about PaleBlue.Energy in a moment, but my background, I've got 25 years experience in upstream oil and gas before I saw the light and left oil and gas to go and work in low carbon. So I spent the last 10 years working outside oil and gas in low carbon transition activity, which has included carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, renewables, and a wide variety of other low carbon activities. So pleased to be here today to talk more about hydrogen.
Super. Hey, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're going to talk about?
So the intent today is to talk about the hydrogen opportunity and explore how the link exists between hydrogen and the oil and gas sector. So having stepped out of oil and gas 10 years ago, as I said, and now realise that there's a lot of opportunity for the oil and gas supply chain, the oil and gas sector in hydrogen. And we've spent a lot of time over the last year or two exploring that and trying to share what that opportunity might be. So keen to share some more of that today.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sam. And Chris, can you tell us why is this of interest to us here at the OGTC?
If I switch the microphone on. This is a technology centre, obviously. Yeah, so from our point of view, highly interested in how we integrate energy, what the future looks like. That's really from quite a selfish point of view. We see great commercial opportunity in changing the way we use hydrocarbons and also extending the life of the oil and gas industry, but by transitioning into a clean growth strategy. From our point of view, roughly speaking, I read in one article estimated something like $24 trillion and over 100 years to build the sort of current carbon economy. I'm sure the engineers in the room will want to debate the figures and the timeline, but if that's approximately right, then we're not going to unpick it overnight. So I'm very interested in a number of themes, gas to wire, but also wire to gas, hence our introduction to PaleBlue. We're a member of the organisation, and very interested to hear what Sam's take is on how we integrate in the future using hydrogen. Okay?
Perfect. Thanks very much. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to Sam. Your 20 minutes start now.
Thank you very much, everybody. So as I said, I'd like to talk a little bit about hydrogen. The title for today's talk is Hydrogen, the Replacement for Oil and Gas. And the most observant of you will have noticed that the title on the OGTC slide had a question mark, but my slide doesn't. So I suggest that this isn't in question, but there is the timing and the nature of the evolution is obviously in question. Try and go the right way here. So why are we interested in hydrogen at all? Of course, we're interested because of climate change. So we're lucky inside our organisation to have two of our team members who, as well as being full-time employees, are explorers in residence for the Royal Scottish Geographical Society. And last year they did an expedition across Alaska on foot, on bike and in canoe from bottom to top of Alaska with no mechanical aids, as it were. And some of these photographs come from that expedition. So this is kind of for us first-hand interest and account of the impact on climate change. So at this end, just very, very briefly, this is a former river channel where the main river used to go until suddenly there was overnight, essentially, a change in the direction of the river, and it went off left in the far distance. Essentially, this is caused by glacial melting. So it's a very unusual situation for this sort of major geological change to happen in such a short period, largely due to climate change. On the this photograph here is taken on the north coast of Alaska, north of Prudhoe Bay, for those of you who are kind of aware of the BP oil and gas facilities. So this is extreme north of Alaska, and that picture there, the white stuff on the right-hand side is the ice and the tundra. It's about 1 meter high. This is the shoreline, this is the sea. What's happening here is that as the tundra melts, the shoreline erodes. So the tundra is melting in this area at a rapid rate, and the shoreline erodes because of the seawater effect. And of course we get impacts like this because a lot of the population is in that area. The canoeists in question were planning, this is an inland lake in northern Alaska, again north of Prudhoe Bay, And on the map, the plan was for the guys to paddle across this area. When they get there, the tundra's melted and the lakes have disappeared. All the water's disappeared into the tundra. So they had to stop their expedition before they got to the final destination because of this. So first-hand impact of climate change. Back to hydrogen. So I'll start at this side. This is a graphic taken from the Hydrogen Council, looking at the 7 potential uses of hydrogen. Hydrogen's an energy vector. So by energy vector, we mean like oil and gas. It can carry energy from place to place, and we use it for lots of different things. So in hydrogen, we've got the opportunity to use it to enable large-scale renewables integration and power generation. The whole piece about hydrogen is not hydrogen or renewables or hydrogen or something else. It's in the mix with everything else. The opportunity to transport it, use it for storage, which is an important aspect, and then use it in a variety of different applications, including transport and heat. And that's shown in this slightly more complicated, slightly different graphic here. We can manufacture hydrogen in lots of different ways, and we can use it in lots of different ways. At the moment, I've got a couple of slides coming up. We'll talk about using hydrogen for electrolysis for transport, which is probably down here somewhere, fuel cells in transport. And I'll talk about making hydrogen from natural gas and using it for heat, which is probably down there somewhere as well. So first of all, I'd like to just talk about this graphic here. So, I don't know about where best to stand, but what we've got is energy consumption at the side in the UK against time. The red line is electricity consumption. We've got transport as a stepped line. And what you notice is this blue line at the top is our heat consumption. So energy is made up of those 3 elements. And we spend a lot of time thinking about decarbonizing our electricity generation, which is this piece here. And we don't spend very much time talking about decarbonizing our heat. We're well advanced. We decarbonize electricity with renewables. We've got a long way to go with decarbonizing heat. It makes up 55% of our energy consumption in the UK, so we need to be working on this if we're going to solve our climate change problems. So one of the opportunities is to take the carbon out of our natural gas and put hydrogen in the gas grid and use that directly instead of natural gas. Luckily, these yellow pipes that we've been putting in the ground for the last 10 years or so are good for carrying hydrogen around. So the potential exists to replace natural gas with hydrogen in the UK. Just like to touch upon transport, and we're in a very lucky position in Aberdeen, having 10 buses, maybe another 10 buses about to arrive. We've got 12 Toyota Mirai fuel cell vehicles. We've got 2 garbage trucks, a road sweeper, and numerous vans, as well as 2 refueling stations. A lot of activity on hydrogen going on in Aberdeen. What many people don't realise is that Aberdeen is a globally leading city with regards to hydrogen and hydrogen transport. It's all happening here. So many people inside the oil and gas sector, it's kind of passing us by. But this is an important step towards the broader hydrogen opportunity. And one of the reasons the council, who've taken the lead in this, are so enthusiastic about it, is part of their vision is to try and engage the region in the broader hydrogen opportunity, which is quite far-sighted, really, I'd suggest. Of course, we can talk lots more about all these slides, but keen to cover quite a lot of ground here. The Hydrogen Council have suggested that the opportunity in hydrogen could reach these figures by 2050. So potentially 2.5 trillion annual sales for hydrogen, 30 million jobs on an annual basis. So this is quite a big and emerging sector. The issue here is the pace at which the sector might emerge. There are a number of projects going on. I'm not going to cover them all, but possibly the most important one for me just to mention is this project here just now. So there's a project going on in the north of England focused around Leeds called Tech20, which is looking at decarbonising natural gas and replacing the gas supply for the city of Leeds and Bradford and the region with hydrogen. It's fairly well advanced, so it's not an idea. It's moving towards what in oil and gas we call FEED, or front-end engineering design, and it's being worked on by Northern Gas Networks, Statoil are involved, so Equinor are involved, and other significant players. So there is a significant body of activity. The hydrogen will be manufactured probably in Teesside using natural gas imported. The CO2 would be taken out of the natural gas and transported and stored offshore using carbon capture and storage. I'll touch upon that in a moment. There are lots of projects here. There's a project, 3 or 4 projects in Scotland, in Orkney, which merits some mention I could come back to later. And all this fits inside the some of the important government strategy and policy things. So in the UK, in the last 12 months, we've had a clean growth strategy and an industrial strategy, both of which point to the importance of hydrogen. And in Scotland, likewise, we've had a strategic energy plan and a climate change plan, both of which point towards the importance of hydrogen. If you've not read these documents and you're vaguely interested in hydrogen, I recommend you have a look, because you'll get a sense of the importance if you go there. So I'd like to talk a little bit about a project that we're working on here called Acorn. And luckily on this big screen, I get 3 slides for the price of 1, as long as I've got enough time to talk about them all. But at this side, we start with a simplified graphic. We've got Scotland, or at least the northeast of Scotland down here. So the plan is to produce natural gas from offshore, which of course we do at the moment. So it comes ashore at St Fergus. About 35% of the UK's natural gas comes in at St Fergus. The forecast is, but the national grid forecast is for that to continue in the long term. So St Fergus will be an important shore import terminal for a while. So we've got the opportunity to reform that natural gas. By reforming it, we mean split it into hydrogen and CO2. The CO2 we can take offshore and sequester using carbon capture and storage. Come to that in just a moment. And the hydrogen we can either commingle into the national transmission system with our natural gas. So we mix it back in with the natural gas, which seems a little bit perverse. But essentially, the end user can use the gas that's coming to his home without worrying about what's in it. And up to 5 or 10 or 15%, that's all fairly technically feasible. Or the gas grid specification does need to change. And alternatively, we can move the hydrogen at 100% level to users who might use it at that level, which obviously includes the potential for using it for transport with further cleanup. But in Aberdeen, that includes the opportunity for transferring the entire gas grid in the Aberdeen area from methane to hydrogen. So carbon capture and storage. I have a power station on this particular schematic, so this isn't a power station, so you have to excuse me here. This would be a steam methane reforming plant. But essentially, we take CO2 from any particular source, we compress it. In the UK, we need to store it offshore, so we can't store it onshore. We drill wells, we inject it deep underground in dense or liquid phase, and we store it either in saline aquifers, which have had previously nothing to do with oil and gas, or in depleted gas fields. Aquifers tend to be larger, so that's a kind of preferred option in this space. Obviously, as I'm talking here, you can see a lot of analogies with oil and gas type activity. This looks just like an oil and gas schematic, but we're moving the fluids backwards. We need to lay pipes, drill wells, build platforms, do subsea things, all the standard activity there. So that brings me to the big graphic at this side, which provides a bit of more of an overview of the Acorn project, a bit more detailed than that one. But essentially, we're looking at the potential for starting the project at St Fergus and storing CO2 offshore in the Acorn CO2 storage site, which is this piece here. We're in the fortunate position of having 3 existing but unused pipelines coming into St Fergus at the moment. The Atlantic Pipeline, the Golden Eye Pipeline, and the Miller Gas System, all of which could transport CO2 offshore. So in addition to the offshore piece, we've got the hydrogen bit, which we've talked about. And the 2 other elements in connection with CO2 or carbon dioxide are the potential for importing CO2 into Peterhead, which is this piece here. So a deep water port at Peterhead provides an opportunity for importing CO2 by ship from other places, most specifically from Rotterdam or from Teesside, where storage might be required and where ships have access. And the final element of this particular slide is this pipeline here called Feeder 10. Feeder 10 is one of the 4 existing natural gas pipelines that goes from St Fergus to the Central Belt. Not all are fully utilised because we're producing less gas through St Fergus than we used to, and the potential exists to repurpose Feeder 10 in order to transport CO2 from the Central Belt up to St Fergus for subsequent storage. So what that does is connect the other industrial emissions from the central belt to the storage capability that we have in Scotland for our CO2 and enable the wider decarbonisation of industry in Scotland. So this project's in its feasibility stage just now. We're hoping that in 2019 we'll move into front-end engineering design, projects supported by the Scottish Government, the UK Government and the EU in terms of funding and activities. So they kind of bringing that together, looking at the oil and gas opportunity. Try to summarise this a little bit in this slide here. I could start anywhere, but let's start here since we were just talking about it. Carbon capture and storage. The project I outlined is just one example of how we can store, where we can store CO2. It's a Scottish project. There are other regions in the UK. We need to be storing CO2 in the northwest of England, possibly in the depleted Hamilton oil field, gas field, sorry. We need to be doing carbon capture and storage from Teesside and from other industrial areas in the UK. So lots of opportunity emerging for that here. Internationally, there are also opportunities. So the oil and gas supply chain in this region should be engaged in that broad opportunity for deploying its services in those areas. Looking at the climate aspects, we have in the UK the Climate Change Act, which defines what our obligations are. 80% reduction in CO2 emissions by 2050. So we've got a lot of work to do, and the subsequent obligations at the Paris Convention, where a wide variety of countries committed to reducing to avoiding temperature rises to more than 2 degrees C. And so hydrogen represents an important part of that process. Here in the northeast, in the oil and gas supply chain, we've got the Vision 2030, which some of you will be familiar with. And on that slide, there are two elements. There's the maximising economic recovery piece and the supply chain piece. And for the supply chain, the opportunity exists to engage in hydrogen and carbon capture and storage in order to grow activity or replace activity that might in the past have been considered to be oil and gas. So supply chain activity is going to be very important. At the same time, as I mentioned, the opportunity for looking at exports. So by becoming expert in carbon capture storage and in hydrogen, the sort of things, the project we talked about before, then there's the opportunity for the oil and gas supply chain to engage in export potential. And some would say that decarbonising our natural gas will be critical to the future of gas. In some countries, at some point, regulations or financial requirements will make it uneconomic or illegal or something else to produce gas without doing CCS. And so getting ahead with hydrogen, with carbon capture and storage, essential part of that process. So that's pretty much what I had to say. We have, for those interested, if it was slightly interesting, we have a conference. We're organising a conference on the 9th of October, along with ERM, our partners, and a wide range of sponsors, including Aberdeen City Council, Scottish Enterprise, and Opportunity North East. And that's here in Aberdeen. And again, the focus is very much on the supply chain engagement and the business opportunity that hydrogen represents. Given it's here, we're very keen to talk about the oil and gas supply chain opportunities. It's free to attend, and you just head to that place there or type that sort of title into Google, and the conference registration details will arise. So if you're interested in knowing more after today, given this breakneck speed introduction to hydrogen, then feel free to head there. Thank you.
Okay, so we're just going to go into Q&A now. For those of you that have questions, if I can ask you just to raise your hand, and then Lauren will find you with the mic. If you can, wait for the mic, because it's useful for us to pick it up on the recording. But this gentleman here, off and running.
Thank you. I would like to know a little bit about efficiency. You know, you are going from a process, to get hydrogen with hydrolysis or some other means, but what's efficiency in that process? What can you get out of that?
Well, the answer is quite complicated, isn't it? Because it depends how we make the hydrogen. So we can make hydrogen in lots of different ways, from natural gas and by decarbonising it with steam, methane, and foaming, or we can make it by electrolyzing water using electricity. Of course, there is energy loss in the system, so it depends how we make it. But the opportunity here is to provide a decarbonised fuel in the system and to replace the existing solutions which might otherwise emit CO2 at the application. So there are losses in the system, but I guess it depends what you're comparing it with as well, doesn't it? So, you know, if we use electricity in the home, then we've got losses in the electricity system. So it's quite a complicated question, and there are a number of different aspects to it depending how the hydrogen's made.
Could you at least tell us what's the most efficient way to do it, and what can you get out of that?
Well, the lowest cost way to make hydrogen is to steam, methane, reform natural gas, and that's how most hydrogen in the world is made today. But increasingly, in the context of the low carbon transition, people are starting to look at making hydrogen from surplus renewables. So if we have a constrained wind, if we're in an island context, not necessarily an island surrounded by water, but an island in an energy sense, then the electricity that we can't use if the wind's blowing but there's not sufficient demand is wasted. And that hydrogen can be made at essentially no cost. And so the efficiency, whilst important, is somewhat secondary to the application. So, as I say, it's quite a complicated space, but I think there are a lot of different factors that come into the discussion.
Thank you. I have a quick question. We're already seeing sort of the hydrogen piece impact us, you know, at community level with the buses that we referred to on the transport side of things. How long do you think it will be before we start seeing hydrogen pipe used for households, you know, for heating?
Good question. So SGN, who are the gas distribution company in the area, are working on a project they call H100. And that involves building 4,500 houses, which would be supplied by hydrogen, 100% hydrogen. The plan is to do it, at the moment, as I understand it, the plan is to do it on the old Exhibition and Conference Centre site. And it's one of the 3 sites in Scotland that SGN are considering for this project, the others being Machrihanish on the west coast, which is very much an island energy location, and Leavenmouth in Fife. And we're working hard to support them on that, but we're obviously very keen for it to be in Aberdeen. If it happens, I'm not certain of the schedule, but my recollection of the schedule is maybe 2022.
Okay. I was just interested whether it was something we were going to see or it was going to be far off in the future. So
it's happening
not
now.
Far away at all.
It's happening now. And of course, to do it in 2022, we're doing work now. I mean, we're doing work on it. SGN are doing work on it. And the opportunity exists for the oil and gas supply chain to do work on that project for SGN. If they haven't done so already, they're about to launch their request for FEEDs, front-end engineering design studies for that project. And you know, our challenge is ensuring that the oil and gas supply chain is adequately engaged to know when that's happening, know what's coming out, and to be able to respond to those studies early. Obviously, that going through the study process provides opportunity for the sector to learn and subsequently to deliver services.
Thank you. Okay. Next question from the floor.
Hi. What's involved in transitioning a house to hydrogen? Is it got the same energy density as methane? Is it just a burner change, or is it a case of you have to change every good around your house? Every oven, everything.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Or is it just tweak?
They said at the start of this. They said at the start of this presentation that experts were to come and present, and it's hard to be an expert in every topic. Anyway, I do know something about that as it happens. So at the moment, there's a big government-funded project ongoing, and Arup and another organisation I forget the name of are studying exactly that, which is what are the appliance changes required. My understanding at the moment is that if you had a central heating boiler that was running on gas, you'd need to change it to a hydrogen boiler. And I think the intent is to provide an opportunity so that people could continue to use the hydrogen for all the other potential gas appliances that currently exist. And various organizations, including a company called Kiwa Gas Tech, are working on the development of those appliances, partly government funded, in order to ensure that all the things that we take for granted work fine, such as you can see the flame. I think with the hydrogen it might have a problem, and there are other issues associated with identifying hydrogen and energy density. So it's not without its challenges, but the feedback to date on the study, which is fairly well advanced, is that there are no insurmountable problems. It's just a matter of doing the design and having the market exist. If the market exists, the manufacturers will build the products to solve that particular problem. And the question, the kind of corollary of that, if I can extend your question for you slightly, is, won't that cost a lot? Of course, it will cost a lot, but those of us old enough remember changing from town gas, by the way, to natural gas, which happened in the 60s. Town gas, which is manufactured from coal, was about 50% hydrogen. So really, we're just going back to where we were all that time ago. And so there's a lot of experience from that time, which we bring forwards. I was going to say something else, but I forget. Anyway, that's good enough for now. Oh yeah, the cost of it. Sorry, there is a significant cost associated with changing out the appliances, but it's a lot less than the cost of electrifying everybody's home, which is the alternative. We've got a hydrogen pathway, or we've got an electrical pathway. If we want to decarbonise, then maybe there's some other options. But the electrical pathway has some potential benefit, and in some areas, no doubt, it'll be good. But the opportunity is for us to continue to use our natural gas grid across the country to supply energy. If we don't do that, we're kind of wasting a very important resource. We're wasting the last 10 years. We've been busy replacing the iron mains replacement program with plastic pipes.
Thank you. We've got a question here.
I was just wondering how many offshore platforms have been identified as being suitable candidates for carbon capture and storage?
Well, that's a good question as well. There's been quite a lot of work done on reuse. Not enough, mind you, but quite a lot. I think our sense is that the primary assets that are suitable for reuse are pipelines. So that's the easiest thing to conceptualize and potentially reuse, is a pipeline which might have transported oil or natural gas, to reuse that for CO2 going the other way. So we've done quite a lot of work looking at platforms. In the past, Shell looked at reusing the Goldeneye platform. Our current thinking, if you like, is that for most carbon capture and storage projects, it would be more cost effective in the long run to use a subsea installation, because we don't need to do much processing. We just need to move the CO2 from the pipe into the ground. And with the subsea technology as it stands just now, we can pretty much do all that. So generally, there's much less interest in the platform than in the pipeline. And likewise with the wells, we'll probably drill new wells. But that's the kind of very generic answer to the question. So it depends on the site, more generally, and what the cost would be to reuse the pipeline, reuse the platform versus building new facilities.
Thank you, Sam.
Hi, Sam. Decarbonising heating means you're going to have an end-user target audience who are homeowners, basically. And I was wondering, has there been research done on any sort of psychological barriers or marketing barriers to persuading homeowners that they're going to go back to using what's effectively town gas in their homes?
That might not be the best way for me to sell it, might it?
No. I just wondered if any research...
Lose the town gas analogy. We've not done it, but there has been work, and there is work ongoing. The network operators are engaged in that, so SGN, Cadent, National Grid. And I think part of the project I mentioned down here on the appliance transformation is looking at the public perception of the transformation. So there is work going on. I'm not an expert in where it's at or what its outcome is. I think that more broadly, there is a lot of work to do on public engagement, because this is a massive change. To a certain extent, that work is at the forefront in Aberdeen, because we all see hydrogen buses going about. So we all, well, those of us that travel by bus hop on and off a hydrogen bus without thinking about it. So that's starting to create the opportunity for public engagement in hydrogen being safe and hydrogen being just another energy source that everybody's comfortable with. But there is clearly work to be done.
Thank you. Next question from the floor, gentleman here.
More of a geology question in terms of why do you think that this carbon capture and storage will work, even though nearly all other projects in the UK never came to fruition?
Well, it sounds like a technical question, but it wasn't really a technical question, was it?
Well,
a geologist asked
the geology is not really understood, but it's also money, I guess. That oftentimes they had a good project, but then in the end the government pulled the funding. Yeah.
So yeah, the reason there have been a number of projects matured in the past. We've been involved with some of them. We're partners in the GoldenEye project. We've been partners in the Caledonia Clean Energy project, and we worked with Scottish Power on the Longanic project. So we're kind of well aware and very disappointed by the fact that all those projects never came to pass. But those projects didn't succeed or were cancelled. Had nothing to do with any technical or subsurface reasons. So I'll come back to that point in a minute. But my understanding of the cancellation of those was largely due to government priorities and the costs associated with those particular activities. And that's quite hard. You know, I can't defend that position. It's quite hard. They were undoubtedly very expensive projects. Part of the opportunity with the Acorn project, we focused on how to get started by reusing existing infrastructure, reusing a lot of the study work that's been previously done to allow us to initiate projects at lower cost whilst creating infrastructure that has sufficient capacity for a lot of CO2 going forwards. So reusing existing pipes and reusing a lot of study work provides that opportunity. The UK, a lot of work has been done, as you're probably aware, on the subsurface aspects of CO2 storage in the UK. We've done a lot of work, and the SCCS have done a lot of work, as you'd be aware, and a lot of other oil and gas type consultancy agencies have done a lot of work. So there is significant expertise. So unlike the capture plant, which you can design and build any way you want, obviously with the geology we have what we have, and we've got to work out if it's suitable. And where I suggest that we've done sufficient work to convince ourselves that there are certain reservoirs that are highly suitable and very low risk for storing CO2 over very long periods. And a lot of those are in Scotland. You know, there are others around the UK and internationally, but the UK is very well blessed with CO2 storage potential, obviously closely linked to our understanding and expertise from the oil and gas sector.
And who will pay for the higher cost? Is it the government or is it the end user of the...
You like the jugular questions, don't you? The reason that CCS hasn't taken off yet is who's going to pay for it. It is the ultimate question. So, the last time around we had a competition and the government promised some funds to the competition and a project contract which would have paid for a project. Didn't happen. At the moment we're working closely with government, as lots of other people in the carbon capture and storage space are, in order to work out how it could be funded. I mean, eventually the early projects will be publicly funded or publicly subsidised. But essentially that means we all pay. One way or another, we all pay.
Just the way how we pay, I guess.
Yeah.
Just gentleman here.
Hello.
Hi.
I liked the presentation. It was very good. Thank you. As you know, we're on the CO2 carbon capture. It was just a point. I saw you had a figure of 200,000 tonnes at St Fergus. Is that the current CO2 annual production? Or am I wrong?
No, it's good. So our plan with St Fergus, we're exploring the potential for capturing existing emissions from the St Fergus gas terminals. As you'll be aware, there's 3 terminals plus a national grid terminal, so there's a number of different. And we've set ourselves the potential for doing 200,000 tonnes. The total emissions from St Fergus, I think, are about 400 or 500,000 tonnes. So it's only a fraction of the total emissions from that site. And that's a relatively, I mean, it's a large quantity, but in terms of CCS, it's a relatively modest amount. And it's just intended to enable the initiation of a full-chain carbon capture and storage project prior to installing a SMR hydrogen plant. And the other option, of course, is to go directly to manufacturing hydrogen, skip the step where we capture CO2 from St Fergus. We're trying to carry both options at the moment in terms of how we move the project forwards.
Okay,
One SMR.
What is CO2 anyway? And that goes up in the air now. Yeah.
Sorry?
And that goes up in
Yes.
the air now. Yeah.
Existing, that
Well,
CO2.
hydrogen buses could sort of stop that.
Yes, we need a lot of hydrogen buses, but yes.
Anyway, thanks very much.
Thank you. We've got time for another couple of questions. Any more from the floor? Charlie.
Thank you. So for the project that you talked about, Acorn, you talked about bringing the natural gas to shore, manufacturing the hydrogen, and then sending the CO2 back. How feasible, and you know what I'm going to say next, how feasible do you think it would be to actually manufacture the hydrogen at source, like offshore, and then just pump the hydrogen back and put the CO2 straight into the ground there?
Yeah, that's entirely feasible. So, I mean, it's just a matter of what makes sense from a project perspective. Technically, why not? Commercially, I'm not sure. It's just a matter of working out what the best way to do it is. But extending that, I mean, the thinking is good, because looking at it another way, the Norwegians are very active in the space of carbon capture and storage and hydrogen. And of course, we import a lot of our natural gas from Norway at the moment. So at the moment, one of the alternatives, if you like, is for us to bring our natural gas to Easington from Norway, maybe move it from there to an inland SMR somewhere where we make hydrogen. We separate the carbon from the hydrogen. We send the carbon back to a shore port somewhere and put it into a boat and send it to Norway to be stored. So the Norwegians could, if we follow that business model, charge us for the carbon twice, once to send it in and once to send it out. So I think the location of SMR is quite an important thing, and I can't remember, I mentioned it before, but we're starting to do some work with SGN, looking at optimum location for SMRs, and thinking of creative about offshore opportunities. We should include that as well. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think we've got one more question from this gentleman here, and that will be us.
So on the transport side, Sam, a couple of aspects, but we're talking hydrogen fuel cells, are we, when you speak about using hydrogen? Or is there a prospect of using the internal combustion engine in a hydrogen?
Both are realistic. So most of these vehicles I showed on the photos, including the buses, are fuel cells. In Fife, they're operating 2 or 3 refuse collection vehicles, I think they are, and they're hydrogen diesel combination internal combustion engines. So there's some of the diesels replaced with hydrogen. Don't ask me any more questions. No, but it is possible to run hydrogen in a modified or combined internal combustion engine.
Two-pronged there, because I was thinking also of the this bandwagon of electric vehicles and where that sits relative to the hydrogen and use in vehicles as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to play out in the kind of vehicle space. I'm going to say the hydrogen vehicles are actually hydrogen electric vehicles as well, so they're all electric vehicles. The question is whether you have batteries or whether you have hydrogen. The vehicle itself is still electric. Some people believe that hydrogen has a big role to play in commercial vehicles and big vehicles, and so there's quite a lot of work going on in the development of buses and big commercial vehicles for hydrogen. I still think there's quite a lot of opportunity for cars and domestic vehicles and small vehicles as well, but it's an emerging space, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens. I think the beauty just now anyway, for me on hydrogen, is that if I drive a hydrogen car, I go to the hydrogen refueling station, I fill it up and I set off, so I can drive to Edinburgh and back in my hydrogen vehicle today without worrying about it. And if I need to refuel it, it takes 3 minutes or 2 minutes, like going to a petrol station. If I have a battery car, then I've got to plug it in. It takes a wee while to do so. But I do myself drive an electric vehicle which is plugged in, so...
Okay, thank you very much. So that's all our time for Q&A. Could I ask you to show your appreciation, please?